Hey, this is Tessa Velasquez, owner of Baked and Wired, a bake joint and La Betty in Washington, D.C., and you're listening to The Soul of Life.
The Enneagram, while it's about individual personality types, it's really about a pathway through life, a location device. Where are you?
Michael Goldberg has been on the faculty of graduate schools of management, law, and psychology. An attorney and certified mediator, he has mediated hundreds of disputes, including large-scale community controversies. And he was an attorney at the U.S. Office of Government Ethics. Michael has taught and consulted with businesses using the Enneagram personality test, and he's the author of The 9 Ways of Working, How to Use the Enneagram to Discover Your Natural Strengths and Work More Effectively.
Just scan the types, the 9 types, and see which one you like least, and see if that's not your type. Oh no, not that one. Let me have any other.
I share with Michael the results of me taking a 20-minute online Enneagram test.
It's important to remember we're not 3s all the time. We're 3s when 3 kicks in. When our defenses kick in, all the types are defenses. Basically, they limit us until we can open up the type and welcome the other types.
We practiced some armchair psychology, talking about Jeff Bezos and Oprah's personality types.
Over the years, she's become a much bigger person.
And Michael delves into how he's examining some of our culture's ancient stories through the lens of the Enneagram in a book he's writing that includes the Old Testament story of Jacob.
It's so interesting. He was a jerk. He was a thief. He stole his brother's blessing. He manipulated his employer. And yet, we root for him. And then once he wrestles with the angel, he's not a jerk anymore.
Can we use the Enneagram to transcend the boundaries of our own story in the world?
You're not just your personality story. You're able to expand to a world beyond yourself.
Or are we tempted to use the Enneagram to narrow our lens and cut us off from connection to others?
The Medusa story is about how we get in a fixation. So if she looked at people, they would turn to stone. Well, this is what happens when you do too much Enneagram or any similar thing, which is that you put people in boxes, you turn them to stone.
Welcome to The Soul of Life. I'm Keith Miller, and this is episode 15 of season 2, How to Use the Enneagram to Master the Puzzle of Personality.
It's certainly been harder as people are in survival to remember that we're magical beings.
I'm Keith Miller, and my podcast, The Soul of Life, is here to help you remember who you really are. I'll bring together people who have gotten off their treadmills. I'll have conversations with athletes, musicians, doctors, scientists, healers, and entrepreneurs to discuss the fascinating edges of our knowledge in neurobiology, psychology, and physics. This is The Soul of Life.
Please take the time now to subscribe to The Soul of Life wherever you're listening. Give it a thumbs up or write a positive review. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss out on these amazing episodes planned for season 2.
Michael Goldberg is a consultant and trainer for people and organizations around the world. He leads trainings, seminars, and retreats, and he speaks at professional conferences and meetings about leadership, executive presence, and team collaboration. He has taught the Enneagram personality styles widely for 30 years. And Michael has written 2 books, The 9 Ways of Working, which introduces the Enneagram personality styles to the workplace, and Travels with Odysseus, which retells Homer's Odyssey as an engaging, profound teaching story that informs and inspires us. Michael, welcome to The Soul of Life. How are you? Yeah, you're welcome. Good to see you. I'm interested to hear about your many years of experience with the Enneagram. The Enneagram is one of these topics in psychology that people talk about all the time when we get in groups. Sometimes people are saying, "Oh, you're a 3. You must be an 8. I'm an 8," and they're tossing around these numbers. And for many years, I've really never studied it, to be honest with you. As a social worker, I've always been sort of trained, I guess, to sort of just get to know people and figure out who they are by experience. But the Enneagram, I suppose, fits in this lineage of other personality tests like the Myers-Briggs, and of course is quite different from psychological psychometric testing. But I wanted to speak with you about the use and utility of the Enneagram, and I guess to start things off, maybe you can share about the uses of the Enneagram and a little bit about the history.
Right. Well, the Enneagram's very old. It appears that the ancient Greeks basically knew the system because it appears in Homer's Odyssey. Homer takes Odysseus through each of the 9 basic types. And I think that set the stage because the Enneagram, while it's about individual personality types, it's really about a pathway through life, kind of a location device. Where are you? And the modern use is as the common use is as 9 personality styles with many subtypes and variations, and each type is kind of the story we tell about ourselves, but the story often gets in the way of who we are, and usually people don't know they're telling a story that we say we learn the Enneagram so that you can forget it, so that you can go just as you were saying for the real person, for the human person underneath.
Right. So it's sort of a guide. It can help us reflect and maybe see ourselves. Maybe I suppose like a mirror.
Oh, I would say very much like a mirror, especially when you find someone else of the same type telling their story and you can recognize yourself in it. Very much a mirror.
It's so difficult to see ourselves, isn't it? For some reason, whatever it is about the way the mind projects outwardly.
To see ourselves as others see us. That is certainly that's certainly something. Yes,
it's like a fish in the water. Sometimes we don't really realize the way that, like you said, the stories that we're using, the lens that we're using to see the world. And of course, we're going to get into the Enneagram and some of the types today. I'm gonna maybe just go down the list of the 9 here for people so they can have a working sense, even if they've studied this before, just to refresh everybody. It's the 9 types. Number 1, the perfectionist, likes to get things done right, regardless of the consequences. And of course, I'll let you expound on some of these. There's a lot more that goes with each definition. But number 2, the 2 type is the helper that nurtures others' careers, perhaps, and really wants to be appreciated for it, maybe demands to be appreciated for it. Number 3 is the producer. They work hard to succeed, but they can burn out easily and overwork themselves. Type number 4 is the connoisseur that explores his or her creativity and deep feelings, but maybe gets lost in feelings. Number 5 is the sage that craves data, loves theories and insight, but maybe forgets the human piece. Number 6 is the troubleshooter, knows the secrets, likes to know the inside scoop, who can be trusted, but can get very paranoid. Number 7, the visionary, inspires people with brilliance and fun, imaginative ideas, but maybe leaves the little details, the closure, to others. Number 8 is the top dog, exercises leadership, but maybe ends up vengeful, maybe can be in a bully or authoritarian kind of mode. And number 9, lastly, is the mediator, who wants everyone working together as a conflict-free team, but maybe forgets his or her own goals.
That's good. And you remind me that the Enneagram can be taken at many levels. There's an easy, superficial level where you can be watching a movie and type the people in it at the level that you're explaining the types. But of course, people need to know these stories are deep and complex and compelling and layered, and you can take them much more profoundly.
What's your own story with getting to know the Enneagram? Why did it take on such an interest in your writing and your career? You wrote The 9 Ways of Working, which is really about the Enneagram.
I learned the Enneagram when I was in college. It wasn't very well known. The principal teacher was a man named Oscar Ichazo, a Bolivian philosopher, and I wasn't that taken with it. It seemed kind of scientific and dry, and I too don't want to put people in boxes. I want to make a connection to the person, to the heart and soul. That's the magic in each of us. But I came back to it some years later, with a wonderful teacher named Helen Palmer, who had thought of the idea of gathering people of each type in a panel, so you could see 5 or 6 people of the type, and it really brought it home. And it showed how we're telling these stories about ourselves that often we don't know, but limit our range, limit our capacity when we're too focused on just our own story. On the other hand, the story tells what's important to us, what we value, what has meaning. And it's nice to know that about yourself. It's nice to know that about somebody you're talking to, because we subtly, in general, have an idea that the people are basically like us, but they are the distorted version. And so it turns out that people really are focused on different things. And it's nice for yourself and for the other to know that you can adjust your focus of attention.
Right. It moves us away from perhaps generalizations that get us into trouble, overgeneralizing, and
right.
helps us get more specific. I'm a marriage counselor, and that working with couples is a big part of my work. And is the Enneagram useful for couples in maybe premarital work, people thinking about starting a relationship together?
I think there may be no better use, even though the Enneagram is used widely in business. It's mostly what I do. And in every sort of endeavor you could think of, teamwork and self-exploration. I don't know of a better use than, or a more dramatically effective use than with couples, because you can predict communication problems from one type to the other. You can see where they might mesh and where they won't mesh. You can make the story that each member of the couple is telling clear to the other so that they can respond to it.
Really gives context to what you're seeing in the behaviors and patterns.
And I would also say the types are very charming. They're very seductive. They have a juice amount to them, and so it's often startling to see your partner in that way when you have been struggling or to see what's important to them, we could say.
Right.
To see what they value.
Looking under the hood.
And then you can respond to that in an honorable way. I'm not a person who thanks people very much. I just need to remember that my husband likes to be thanked, and I will remember to do that from now on.
Right. That reminds me, I read the biography of Jeff Bezos, the founder, owner of Amazon.
Yes.
And his biographer writes about how really horrible he is with understanding and mapping the minds of other people around him, and how notoriously difficult to work for because of that, sort of an exacting of perfection, and and yet he knows that that's an impediment and knew that it is, and brought people around him and got people around him who would give him feedback and just teach him what are the skills I need, like you said, like, I should thank people.
Right.
I should ask them if they have time to talk, or something. I don't know if that's what he does. I doubt that's what he does. But
I doubt it.
Yeah, so it can be a tool. And it also you remind me of the 5 love languages, one of the perennial bestsellers by Gary Chapman for couples, that really helps people see, one of your core needs is affirmation.
Right.
Okay, so that's not one of mine, but I can see that's something you need kind of a daily basis. And if you don't get it, you're going to be having trouble. It just helps people understand and kind of grease the wheels a little bit. psychologists kind of work differently when they're assessing the personality, right? I mean, in other words, a psychometric personality inventory test is a day long at least, or half a day, multiple batteries, meaning multiple tests, kind of testing the validity of each other. This is not something really meant to assess the personality, right? Can you talk about the differences? This is not a scientifically based method.
There are a lot of people who would disagree. There are psychometric tests using the Enneagram. I don't play there. For me, it's about mythology and story. I'm more interested in the flow and use in daily life as you live your story.
And how is it different from the Myers-Briggs, another very popular personality inventory?
That's such a great question. And for a while, there was a lot of conversation on the internet and elsewhere. And I presented at some Myers-Briggs conferences years ago. So I'll say this gently because I'm not an expert in MBTI, but in general, the categories of Myers-Briggs, which are helpful, more than helpful, are they sit there. Whereas the Enneagram story is it flows. It tells you kind of where you've come from, where you might be going, and there may be some overlap between the two in terms of issues that you face. But there's a whole different feel to the movement of the Enneagram than the categories of Myers-Briggs. You can get stuck in the Enneagram too,
sure,
as a system of categories like Myers-Briggs, but I think that's a parochial use.
I see. So there's more flow to the Enneagram from your perspective, and more ways to interact with it, and kind of.
That's my impression, without being an expert. And
sure.
I don't want anybody in the MBTI world to take it too seriously.
That's fair. Maybe others would disagree. We'll talk about my Enneagram test, which I took before I was going to speak to you. I found some online offering, and I think they needed your email in order to give you some of the results, and I think it was a 20-minute test, and then if you want the full results, you pay $20 or something. So I bit the bit the bug on that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I shared with you my results. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how that typing came out. But Christian groups have flocked. When I was looking up and researching the Enneagram, a lot of Christian groups, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, and I think even Jewish groups, are using the Enneagram for spiritual growth and maybe Bible study. What's your take on that? Why has there been such a movement?
I like that. One frame of the Enneagram is the old vices and virtues, and so each type has its own vices and virtues, and it's easy to slide into theology from that. Some of the earliest teachers were religious priests and nuns, and they brought it to those communities. It's not without controversy, though. There are people who think that it's not the most spiritual thing. Mm-hmm. But mostly, as I understand it, it's very popular in those groups.
It seems to be enough to get the Vatican's attention, so that the Vatican, I think, wrote a statement about,
I remember
something like, "Be careful, like this is not the same as the Scripture," and just use it as a tool or something like that. They're just sort of a caution. I think they put a yellow flag on it. Is there an Enneagram type of person, like a person who just loves to be typed? Someone who loves to have things in categories. Is that one of the types?
When you first learn the Enneagram, there's as I was saying it, you can feel the charm of the types. And I think that especially when you're just learning it, you see type everywhere in characters in fiction and movies, TV. And I think it's natural to want to type them. We see typings of the characters in all kinds of TV shows that people write articles about.
Right. It's nice for armchair psychology, I suppose.
That's it. Yeah. That's very good.
So I mentioned I took this maybe 10 or 20 minute test, and I got this report, sent you the report. And so let me look at this for a minute. So I have to say, I didn't feel flattered. Like I wasn't expecting to be typed as a 3, and I'll just talk about so a 3 is the producer who works hard to succeed, but on the other side can burn out and overwork. And that's certainly, that's me in a lot of ways. I guess that maybe we have this reaction. I have this reaction. I don't want to see myself that way. Let's talk. Can we talk about some impressions of the report mean? And they have these groupings about, what percentage of a match you are with other types. So even though they show me as a more dominant 3, there's, my 8 is very strong. And then, many of the others are not too far off. It's not as if I'm just a 3. So can you talk about how these groupings work together a little bit?
The way I learned to do Enneagram typing was said to be the traditional way, which was in a conversation with someone. And that over the course of an hour or so, you would be able to find where their attention went and how they responded to various situations and so on. And that kind of typing is very leisurely, but it takes a lot of time. You could take a 20-minute test, but all of the instruments have been developed in relatively recent years, and they don't offer that layeredness or richness of finding type. A lot of types might respond similarly to the same situation that you would find on an instrument, but for different reasons. So probing motivation is critical. I used to say, just scan the types, the 9 types, and scan a definition, a paragraph definition of them, and see which one you like least, and see if that's not your type. Oh no, not that one. Let me have any other. And that's just the beginning, of course. What are you drawn to in a more subtle way? As far as your 3-ness, it's important to remember we're not 3s all the time. We're 3s when 3 kicks in. When our defenses kick in, all the types are defenses, even though there are high sides and benefits to all of them. Basically, they limit us until we can open up the type and welcome the other types, because in appropriate situations that we can be more capacious, more flexible inside ourselves.
The goal is really integration, right? It's not to say, I'm a 3, so that's the end of the story.
That's right. Someone might say, and it's typical of the type, I'm an 8, the big bully type. I'm an 8, learn to deal with it. But of course, that's not the deeper work.
No, right. There's so many different ways to use it. Are there people that we would recognize, public figures whose types are known? You mentioned, I think, Oprah Winfrey. What's her type?
Please take the time now to subscribe to The Soul of Life wherever you're listening. Give it a thumbs up or write a positive review. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss out on these amazing episodes planned for season 2.
Well, she's 3. But she's a lovely version, and over the years she's become a much bigger person.
Right.
You might say of someone who's kind of let go of their type, or who holds it lightly, that they're not stuck in the type. They can move around. They can call on other aspects of themselves.
Right.
So, but The 3 is a person who works hard, who is successful, who is often a leader in the field, and Oprah has that, hardworking success.
Yeah, and they present well. 3s present well.
We call them image points. There are a couple that are that want you, especially. It's true of everybody, but especially the image points, of which 3 is one. They want to appear to you in a certain way. They want to appear confident, successful, whether or not they're struggling inside with their own image of success.
Right.
You got to look good. Fake it till you make it is
fake it till you make it, right? And that's the part of it that just kind of hit me between the eyes. Like, whoa, wait a minute, that's not how I like to see myself. I like to, And as you point out, I think, I'd rather be one of these lovely 3s, And so I think, but I do think that there's, other pieces, other types that also are strong for me. The helper, the 2 is a very strong piece for me. My training, my spiritual background, my ability to empathize and really care for others, and sort of expect everyone to care, for each other. That's sort of, and also being visionary. So I can see that's a 7, liking imaginative things. Do people? You've done a lot of workshops. Do people say, what's Goldberg? So what are you? Do they guess your type?
More years ago, when I was more prominent, maybe the people would discuss my type on the internet. It was pretty funny. People would say, "Well, Goldberg's a 3 because he works in business, and that's a 3 world." But of course, I'm not really very 3 in real life.
I was going to put you more around a 7 if I'm using my armchair. Well,
I have a lot of that spreading good cheer quality, and so you wouldn't be wrong.
Sure.
I also have a lot of 4 where people are concerned about going down and in and about depth. And in a sense, both of those are opposite, but they appear at different times.
Right.
I'm probably more 7 in public.
I see, yeah.
And more 4 alone.
Really makes sense to me what you're saying. I didn't really realize that there was this integrative piece with the Enneagram. I'm liking it more as we talk, the more I hear about it, because so much of what I do in the work as an IFS practitioner, internal family systems, which views the mind as naturally multiple, that we have all these parts, and they're not always distinct, but they can be, they can take on roles of either protective, or push away pain. So we either manage pain or try to prevent pain by managing it, or the pain's already out, we're just trying to get rid of it. That's a firefighter. But that the whole goal is that we can unblend from these parts, that when we unblend from the parts, we identify them, we appreciate them, and then have them sit somewhere beside us or behind us, and we are actually present. The parts are there for us, and they're aspects of us, but they're not us.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds very similar to what you're describing. Tell me about your book. Tell me, because I know it has something to do with the story of Jacob, which I see behind you. I think Jacob's wrestling with the angel there, and
that's right. Very good. Well, Jacob was a 3. Jacob was unquestionably a 3. I don't want to say like you, but there's resonance.
I mean, he was kind of a jerk, right? He's a big time jerk.
It's so interesting. He was a jerk. He was a thief. He stole his brother's blessing. He manipulated his employer, Laban, and yet, as people have pointed out, we root for him. And then once he wrestles with the angel, he's not a jerk anymore. The blessing of the angel is that his new name is now Israel, and Israel meaning he who wrestles with the divine. And once he can, there's a book-length story here that will hopefully come out soon. But one explanation is that his story changes from a linear story that's like a sign. It has a literal meaning, to a symbolic story where he lives in both worlds, where he lives in the larger life world, and where he lives in the mundane world, and he translates one for the other. And that's an initiation. And then you would really have trouble talking about him as a 3 then, because he's really transcended that level of analysis. He's operating on his own imagination. He's there for others in a way that a fixated 3 might not be. And so that story is a story of how you let go of the fixation. It's by entering a larger life. You're not just your personality story, but you're able to expand to a world beyond yourself.
I find that so moving, to this idea that this total grade A asshole has a encounter with the divine. Somehow the divine finds him worthy enough to wrestle with, in this visionary sense, whether it's metaphorical or right. But there's some clear transcendence of reality that took place there for him, and he got out of, through that vision and through that encounter, he got out of his rigid life that was killing him and probably killing others that he was having contact with. And it transformed him, and it somehow energized this process of expanding.
That's right.
That's so much more.
Exactly it.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a rich story. So your book is about that, and what else? If anything else that
it's basically, I retell 2 stories: the Jacob story, and also the Medusa story from Greek mythology. And what happens in Medusa, if the Jacob story is about how we get rid of our Enneagram number, get rid of the fixation by expanding, the Medusa story is about how we get in a fixation and we get stuck with one god. Medusa pissed off Athena, and Athena froze her. She froze her face. So she froze the way she was looking. She could only look one way. And Athena gave Medusa the evil eye so that she would judge people. And also, if she looked at people, they would turn to stone. Well, this is what happens when you do too much Enneagram or any similar thing, which is that you put people in boxes and categorize them, and effectively you turn them to stone, because there's so much more to the person, but you've fixed them in a certain way. And the way that Medusa gets out of it, ultimately, Perseus comes and he brings the tools of many gods. He brings Zeus's sword and Hades' helmet, which makes Perseus invisible, and he has the Talaria, which are Hermes' famous winged shoes, so that he can travel at the speed of thought, and Athena's shield, of course. And so, by bringing the perspectives of many gods, many angles, it gets Medusa out of her frozen state. And that's the solution with the Enneagram, to welcome or integrate, as you said, the other perspectives, so that you can call on them as necessary, as appropriate, and you're not just stuck in one all the time.
Right. Well said. I mean, that and the rendering that you have of Medusa in your background is maybe one of the more flattering ones that are out there.
Usually she's meant to be terrifying, but
right.
This one's kind of cute.
Right. I mean, you're really you put your finger on it really well, Michael. That you're talking about that. I think like so many things that we learn, any knowledge or tool that we have, it's just a tool, right? Like it's not something that
Right.
once we start worshiping that tool or maybe ascribing sacred value to it as if it's flawless, then it really becomes like we're the tool, I suppose. It's using us, sort of like our phones, right? These phones have so much knowledge at our fingertips and so much that can help us expand our minds and connect us with others. And yet, if we're not aware that it's just a tool, it's like a shovel at the end of the day.
It's just a tool.
Yeah. How are we using that tool? That's the better question.
That's exactly right. It's not the map is not the territory.
The map is not the territory. That's well said. Yeah. Yeah. Well, for so many people, especially during this time, we're looking for maps for sure. We're looking for answers, and maybe more than ever during this time, people are dealing with grief, Michael. I think that's a big theme that I'm hearing, that it's, and we're not aware that we're dealing with grief. We get angry and we get into fights with other people. We get into a frenzy. We get paranoid about politics, and then we're not even realizing what's driving it, what's underneath it. We're sad about something. Maybe we've lost, whether it's an identity or we're afraid we're losing an identity or something, or certainly tangibly, people have lost economically. People have lost their health. So we need maps. Enneagram seems like a good place to start.
It certainly helps in the process of expanding your playing field. It's a tool to connect with other people in a deeper way, which I guess you could say is generally helpful.
You remind me of the Bill Moyers episode interview with Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
Right. What a rich interview that is, where he talks about his legendary work with mythology and comparative mythology. Hero with 1,000 Faces. What a wonderful odyssey that is as well.
Moyers talked about working with Campbell, and apparently that wildly successful series of interviews was very difficult to cut, and they had a time picking out the juicy parts and making it coherent. As good as Campbell's very interesting, and his books are very worthwhile, but I always like that kind of behind the scenes knowing.
Yeah, because Bill Moyers is so smooth and so
right. Love him.
Pulled it all together. But what was the thing that stood out to me? Oh, just the idea, and I wonder if you have a thought on this, that we've lost as a culture, especially as a Western culture, I'll say, as a modern Western culture in the information age. Let's just put all those qualifiers in there. Have we lost our sense of ritual and our sense of the mythology?
When life is about survival, it's harder to address meaning, which is what mythology gives us. There is a way that when we dismiss the larger life, we lose that aspect of our lives having meaning. It's certainly been harder as people are in survival mode to remember that we're magical beings.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, we have the magic of Disney, I suppose, and these Hollywood studios, because we're storytellers, aren't we? At our hearts, we're storytellers. We're meant to make sense of these puzzles.
That's right. We're meant to make sense of these puzzles. We're storytellers at heart, and we give meaning to our lives through our story.
Anything else you want to share about where people can find you, or any other thoughts?
Thank you. The website is 9waysofworking.com. The books are The 9 Ways of Working, which is an introduction to the Enneagram. Travels with Odysseus, which, I don't know, people sometimes are worried that they don't know the Odyssey, but you don't have to know the Odyssey. Everything that you need is right there. And it tells the story of Odysseus traveling through the lands of the Enneagram. And the new book, Medusa and Joseph, hopefully soon.
That's great. I hope people find you through this. Michael Goldberg, thank you for being here on The Soul of Life.
Thank you, Keith. This was really nice. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to The Soul of Life. This is Keith Miller. Oh, and don't forget, please leave a thumbs up or a like for this episode wherever you're listening so that others like you may find the soul of life. I mean, really, it's not every day you get to share the soul of life with someone. Okay, so you can post a comment or question on souloflifeshow.com. I'd love to hear from you. And please subscribe now to get the next episode. I look forward to sharing more of my soul of life with you.
I like it, and it's not harsh to my eardrum.
All right, I will go.